Good morning, folks, and welcome to the third meeting of the Education and Culture Committee in 2013. Can I remind members and those who may enter the public gallery that mobile phones and electronic devices should be switched off at all times. I've received apologies from the convener, Stuart Maxwell, and can I welcome Marco Biaggi to the committee as his substitute. I know Mr Biaggi will have some probing questions for the witnesses today. We're following on with our inquiry into decision making on whether to take children into care. Our first item today is an evidence session with officials from the Scottish Government's Children's Hearings team, and the purpose of this session is twofold. First, the officials will provide an overview of the subordinate legislation arising from the Children's Hearing Scotland Act 2011 that will shortly be considered by the committee, and secondly we will discuss concerns about the children's hearing system that have been raised during our inquiry into decision making on whether to take children into care. The committee took evidence on these issues a fortnight ago from various representatives of the children's hearing system. Can I welcome to the committee Kit Wyeth, head of the children's hearings team, and Tom McNamara, team leader, children's hearings team. Could I invite Kit to make an opening statement, and then we'll follow on with questions.
Great. Thank you very much. We very much welcome the opportunity to speak to the committee today about the SSIs that the government is going to be bringing forward under the 2011 Act, and also to talk about the committee's taking children into care inquiry. By way of introduction, I'm going to offer a brief overview of the 2011 Act and the SSIs that will be coming to the Parliament over the coming months. Say a little bit about the role of the Scottish Government now and after implementation of the Act, and also talk about the role of the National Convener and Children's Hearing Scotland post implementation as well, and also offer some thoughts on the role of panel members, picking up on some of the issues that were explored by the committee in its session on the 15th of January. So, by way of introduction, the key aim of the 2011 Act is to strengthen and modernise the hearing system. It's very much a recognition that the hearing system works very, very well at the moment, but a need just to strengthen it and try to modernise it, focusing on improving outcomes for children and young people by addressing their needs and promoting their rights. And I think as well as that improvement in outcomes, the objectives of the reform are to ensure that the hearing system is more child-friendly, that it's nationally consistent but locally delivered, and that it's better equipped to make effective evidence-based decisions for the children and young people within it. The Act introduces changes to structures and procedures within the system, and also changes to the way that the rights of children and young people are supported. In terms of structure, the Act creates the role of National Convener to be the figurehead and national voice for panel members, establishes a national body, Children's Hearing Scotland, to support the National Convener, and it establishes a national children's panel to replace the current 32 local panels and area support teams to support the panel members at local level. New procedures include the feedback loop, which will provide information to panel members on the implementation of compulsory supervision orders, and it provides more flexible interim measures which will allow hearing to take urgent steps to protect children where the need arises. In terms of rights, the Act introduces a number of measures to help ensure that the views and opinions of children are heard more effectively in the hearing system, such as having a mechanism to access advocacy support. The Act also makes important changes to the retention of information about children referred to hearings on offence grounds. So a number of procedural changes as well, rights-based changes there too. So some of these elements of the Act have already been commenced. For example, we now have a National Convener, we now have Children's Hearing Scotland. Those elements of the Act have already been commenced to allow preparation for the main provisions of the Act to come into force, which will happen on the 24th of June of this year. And the Act provides the framework for those new operations, for the new arrangements for the hearing system. The SSIs that sit beneath the Act will provide much of the detail. And in total, the Scottish Government is bringing forward around 20 SSIs between now and June of 2013. Now, 5 sets are already with the Parliament, 4 negative instruments which deal with some issues relating to SCRA, safeguarders and child protection. And there's an affirmative instrument dealing with cross-border issues. And I understand that the Minister's coming to the committee to move that instrument early next month, or actually I think early in March. The rest of the instruments that we have coming forward, and the majority of these are affirmative, will come to Parliament during April and May of this year. The most significant of these is the procedural rules, which will set out the detail for the day-to-day operation of the children's hearings and pre-hearing panels, which will kind of form the bulk of the children's hearing system. Others that we have coming forward deal with other significant issues such as secure accommodation, legal aid and vulnerable witnesses. Now, I won't go into any more detail about those instruments just now, but obviously I'm more than happy to take questions from the committee if you have any on the instruments that are coming forward. So currently and historically, the Scottish Government is responsible for the legislation, policy and governance for the children's hearing system. In practical terms, our team is responsible for overseeing the day-to-day operation of the system at national level. We have responsibility for the development and oversight of legislation, for advising on all panel appointments, resignations and reappointments, for all Children's Panel Advisory Committee appointments administration, for supporting the key national representative groups such as the Children's Panel Chairman's Group, and we provide general advice on the hearing systems to volunteers, partners and other observers on a day-to-day basis. We have responsibility for the current national training arrangements for panel members as well. And the team also has a sponsor role in terms of both Children's Hearing Scotland and SCRA. So as we move towards and beyond June, our team will focus on supporting a confident and smooth move across to the new arrangements, and will deal with any outstanding issues which remain once we get beyond the 24th of June. After that point, we'll no longer have responsibility for the day-to-day operation of the system, but we'll continue to have an ongoing responsibility for the relevant legislation. We'll continue to sponsor both CHS and SCRA, and we'll have an ongoing management relationship with the contractor who'll be running the new National Safeguarder panel as well. We'll continue to have responsibility for panel member training until September of 2013. It's the end of September that arrangements for training will pass over to the National Convener and to CHS. And the National Convener and CHS will also take on the full range of administrative and other kind of national panel support functions that we currently carry out. And that includes appointments and reappointments and all the work, the day-to-day work supporting the panel at local level. The National Convener will also make appointments to and support the new area support teams. And CHS staff will work very closely with those area support teams to ensure that that panel members get the support they need at local level. And as I've said, from October 2013, the National Convener will assume responsibility for national training for panel members too. There's quite a lot of discussion when the committee met on the 15th of January about the role of panel members and how well prepared they are to carry out the vital role that they play. I think it's important to remember that hearings are independent tribunals charged with taking decisions in the best interests of children. And since its establishment in 1971, that welfare of the child has been the kind of fundamental principle to the operation of the whole of the children's hearing system. I've never met a panel member who isn't totally committed to doing their very best for the most vulnerable children who come in front of them in hearings. Every panel member is specially selected and trained to sit as a tribunal member in their own local area. And great care and time is taken over the recruitment and appointment of those panel members. For example, in the 2012 recruitment campaign for panel members, we had more than 10,000 expressions of interest from individuals wanting to be a panel member, and from that, around 500 to 600 were actually appointed. It's quite a long, quite an intensive recruitment and appointment and then training process before somebody takes up a role as a panel member. And once they are a panel member, they are regularly monitored, and their suitability for reappointment is assessed every 3 years. So it's quite an astringent process that's gone through. And I would say that, in concluding, that I think the Scottish Government has great faith in the panel members that we have and the decisions that they take. And I think that their skill and dedication has been very much the cornerstone of the hearing system up until this point in time, and it will continue to be that as we move into and through the new arrangements after June of this year.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Does anybody have any questions on the statutory instruments, first of all? No? Okay. I'm sure we will when, as we go through all 20 of them. Could I therefore ask, invite questions from members? Liz Smith?
Thank you very much for your comprehensive overview of the procedure. I think what concerns the committee just now is that there are a lot of questions over various aspects of the new legislation. And the first one, if I can deal with it, is about the consistency of decision making. And throughout all the evidence we've taken this time, and actually I have to say this appeared in the last committee too, that it's been put to us in quite a bit of the evidence that there is a lack of consistency. We've been given examples of panel members obviously changing on too frequent a basis. We've also had it put to us that in some circumstances there have been panel members who perhaps valued the opinions of different professionals at a different level from other panel members. We've had it put to members of people with learning difficulties and disabled community who feel particularly aggrieved that perhaps their situations are not readily understood. And I just wonder if you could give us some idea of how you think the new legislation will try to address these pretty deep-seated concerns about the inconsistencies that we have in the current system.
You want to go?
Okay, if it would be useful, I think that I'll try and take the first 3 or 4 elements of the question. There's a lot there to take on. Looking first at the issue around consistency in decision making. While it's important that the tribunal makes those decisions within the scope of their powers and within reasonable parameters, I think that what the tribunal would stand on and what we would recognise as best practice, and the most important facet, is that the best decision for that child on that day is made. In any given hearing, there are obviously the 3 individual panel members, all trained and prepared and overseen, as Kit mentioned. They all give their own decision, so that moderates decision making within that hearing to a degree. And prompted by some of the committee's interest, back on the 15th of January evidence session, we took a look back at SCRA's online statistics about the responses of children's hearings to reporter decisions and how they handled those. I couldn't claim to have done any detailed analysis on that, but there didn't seem to be any undue variation in decision making and conversion from recommendations for supervision and going onwards to fresh supervision requirements. So that's the consistency aspect. I think that the next area of interest was in continuity of panel members between one hearing and the next. I thought that Hugh McNaughton dealt beautifully with that actually on the 15th of January. Where it's going to be beneficial to that child and good for their experience of the system, then there are arrangements to enable the hearing to log with the reporter that at least one member can continue with that child on to the next hearing. And certainly under the new arrangements, I think, specifically in the draft procedural rules, there will still be arrangements to allow that to continue to happen.
Yeah. So can I just stop you there? I mean, I think you're right. I think that's very important. But as I understand it, that cannot happen just now.
Yes, it can happen just now.
What is it that's going to be specific about the new legislation that will improve the whole situation? Is it just because this is not being applied as it should be just now, or what's going to happen to improve that situation?
Yeah, I think this is probably a theme that we'll return to again during the discussion, that there are elements and mechanisms within the system that allow these kind of beneficial actions to take place, but it's really systematising that and making sure that all panel members and all the players within the system are aware that these steps can be taken and have some confidence that they should be taken, and so making sure that that's nice and regular.
So is that then a training issue, or is there going to be something specifically written into the legislation that you believe would solve that problem?
On continuity specifically, what happens at the moment is that it's the authority panel chairman that has the responsibility for scheduling the hearings rota, and they take a range of approaches to actually discharging that responsibility, whether that's actually completing it all themselves or involving a deputy or getting some administrative support from the local authority to complete that. And the way that they come at that task, the variables that they feed into the rota, both in terms of conflict of interest and eligibility and intervals between sitting, all these kind of components of the rota, they tend to be discharged in different ways from place to place. And I think mentioning the theme that at the beginning there, what will be important is that that is now taken forward under the new arrangements, under a much more regular and an organised basis, on the basis of national standards that CHS and the National Convener have already published. And each one of these kind of key activities, for whether it's scheduling hearings, whether it's monitoring panel members' practice in hearings, whether it's looking at suitability for reappointment, those will all be taken forward on a much more consistent national basis.
Right, because there are national guidelines.
Because there will be national guidelines.
Okay.
There's quite a wide discretion within the 95 Act and the 96 rules to allow that to happen just now.
Could I ask you about the second part of the question, which is, and as I say, it really was put to us pretty strongly by some groups, that not always are their opinions equally valued.
Yeah.
I know that's a very difficult thing
Yes.
to deal with, but nonetheless it does seem to be something that is causing a great deal of concern. I'd just be interested to know how you feel that we can make the situation a bit better.
Again, what I would say is that panel members are trained to take account of and to give due weight to each element of the advice and the assessment that they get. And I suppose as independent tribunal members, they're best placed to, they're probably more concerned about the quality and the currency and the relevance of the information that they get, rather than where or who it came from, to be honest. So what they will do is they will look at who's presented the most persuasive and relevant arguments in that case on that morning.
So what would you say, in terms of what Malcolm Schaefer said to us, what would you see as the biggest changes that could take place within the training programme that would help?
Well, I think that the Malcolm Schaefer's evidence kind of indicated that it was up in reference to SCRA's study last year, was that panel members were following social work recommendations in that sample in over 90% of cases. So that in and of itself doesn't seem to indicate that there's a fundamental difficulty. What I do know is that the training officers involve partners from a range of professional disciplines, whether that's social work, the police, the judiciary, health professionals, and actually being involved in delivering panel member training, where the segment or the element that they're covering during their pre-service training is relevant to that professional's background and interest, then they closely involve them in that. So while absolutely receptive to, and I think that it's always been our experience that panel members are always receptive to feedback, suggestions, and even criticism where it's going to help them to do better by children. I've never detected any complacency in that community. I think that what we have to do is, having prepared them properly and having the assurance that their work's appropriately supervised, etc. We have to kind of respect their tribunal role in that day.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. I think it is a difficult issue, but if we look at the wealth of evidence that we have as a committee, it is pretty strong that they feel that there is a problem. And I was just interested to know where you think that the new training procedure would help to adjust that. Anyway, thank you very much.
Just on that, you said that either there could remain some consistency in the makeup of the panel, or it could be changed if it was deemed as beneficial for the child. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. In whose opinion is it deemed as being beneficial for the child? Who?
Well, the chair of the hearing, ultimately the panel member who's running that tribunal on the day, would make that decision, and they would make an assessment whether there'd been a particular rapport struck up with one of the individuals, one of the three on the hearing or more, or whether or not the issues that were live on that day merited, and there were remaining concerns that they felt that it would be useful for one member to continue or more than one member to continue on to the next hearing. I suppose following the logic of the previous remarks about the consistency of oversight and really implementing and bringing home the national standards, both in practice and procedure, is that where all panel members are prepared and overseen and confident to the same degree, then that in itself brings a comfort, because where it's going to be useful to have continuity, yes, then that can be arranged. But where it's not always possible in terms of the rota, then at least the child and the family can have the confidence that whoever's seen them at their next hearing will be prepared and confident and competent to do a good job by them at that next discussion.
Liam MacArthur?
Thanks, Commissioner. Maybe kind of flip this round a little bit. I mean, I think Liz is absolutely right about the evidence we've received in relation to the concerns about consistency. At the same time, I suppose there is a system set up where the panel members act as a bit of a check and a challenge function in terms of the evidence that's brought before them. Now, you've talked about the extent to which hearings tend to follow the advice of social work teams. I think colleagues will come on to the issue around the attitudes of parents and the involvement of parents in the process. But is there a risk that, in terms of the training provisions that are put in, the oversight, the support, etc., you talk about, that there's a kind of homogenisation, and that that challenge function becomes less, is diminished, because in a sense there is this kind of pursuit of consistency, rather than having perhaps kind of creative tension in the mix that does force social work teams and others to defend the evidence and defend the recommendations that they're making.
Well, I think that there will always be a healthy sort of delineation between the roles of social workers and others professionals that come to the hearing system and the panel members as the ultimate decision makers, and when they're focused on pursuing the best interests of that child or young person, then inevitably, when the hearing's there to consider compulsory measures, they'll get into difficult discussions. I think what the new arrangement, and I should say that children's hearings training is as Kit mentioned, is very diligent and very highly regarded, certainly among the panel member community. But what the new arrangements will bring, rather than homogenisation as such, is real clarity that social workers, other partners, other observers can see that that challenge function, as you put it, is going to be carried out within parameters that can be seen and understood and related to, I suppose.
And I mean, you talk about a figure of around 90% or so of decisions that tend to follow social work recommendations. Would it be a concern of yours were that percentage to go higher as a result of the changes that have been made? Would you expect it to remain the same, but the kind of qualitative nature of the decisions are kind of more robust and stand up to greater scrutiny?
Well, I mean, I thought it was a really useful statistic, just in terms of responding to the concern that there was wholesale distance between social work recommendations and other people's views and assessments coming to the panel, and then the view that hearings ultimately take. I think I would kind of return to the first principle, I suppose, about the decision being the best decision on the individual day, and not going to those kind of system level indicators at each turn, I suppose.
Okay.
Just when you mentioned that the panel could remain the same or change if it's beneficial for the child, and that's made by the chair of the panel, it kind of feeds on to the next sort of area to look at in terms of we had a number of people have raised the issue, particularly people who've been through the system, that the system is very much weighted towards adults within the system, and whether that be professionals, parents or whoever, and that it's not particularly about the child at the centre as maybe is claimed. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we would certainly accept that that there is a real issue around children really feeling and believing that the hearing is about them and not about the adults in the room. And I think that there's plenty of research been done now, with children and young people in the system or have been through the system to make clear that they don't always feel that it's about them. And I think that's something that we've sought to try and address in part through the Act, and there are measures in the Act which will help to help try and address that. I mean, the provision around advocacy is an obvious one. There are other measures as well which will ensure that the panel chair in each hearing satisfies themselves that the child has had the chance to have their say, that they've had the chance to put their views across in the preparation of the materials for the hearing, and also that during the hearing itself they have the chance to really have their say and to put their points of view across as part of that hearing. I mean, I think one thing that's a mechanism that's often used in hearings is for the chair of the hearing to clear the room of everybody but the child, so that the child can have the chance to speak by themselves, uninhibited by other professionals being in the room. I think it's also important to stress that through the panel training, it's very much the emphasis is on the fact that the hearing is about the child, and it is beholden on the chair of the hearing to ensure that that is the case. I mean, I think that they clearly need to hear from the professionals in the room in order to take the well-evidenced decision that they need to take in that child's best interest. But, in doing that, they also need to give the child their place, give the child the opportunity to have their say. And, in many respects, it's a case of engaging effectively with the child to try and help them, feel more comfortable in speaking in that environment. I mean, I think that, it's an ongoing challenge. So there are things in the Act that will help address that, but I also think that more than that, there is also an issue just around, more generally around the culture and practice of hearings that need to be addressed, which you can't necessarily do through legislation, but actually just is something that needs to become more the way that hearings actually take place.
I appreciate there's a role for advocacy, but there is a bit of irony there that actually the response to this is to actually bring another adult into the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. What I would say on that, I mean, I do think that what the advocacy provisions are partly about is about helping to prepare the child before. It's not just about simply having somebody in the room with them in a hearing. I think it is also about helping the child prepare for the experience they're going to have in the hearing, to help them understand the process, understand their role within it, their rights within it as well. So I think that clearly advocacy support, we'll perhaps talk more about this in a bit, but I think advocacy support is many different things to different people, and I think definitely one element of it is about empowering the child to speak on their own behalf. And it may be that they don't need to take somebody into the room with them, it's just about the fact they are able, when they're there, to feel confident to have their say.
And one of the themes that's gone through the evidence that we've received is about well-connected parents, and how throughout the sort of social work system, how they're able to use and bring in different professionals, different advocates for them in the process. How does that throw up a kind of different challenge in the system?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know any panel member who would say that their primary focus in the hearing isn't about the child and doing what's in the best interest of the child. I think that at the same time I would accept that parents do want to have their say. They have a right to have their say, because clearly decisions taken about their children will affect them. I think that the significant change that was made in respect of parents was allowing them the right to state-funded legal support back in 2009. And I think that many parents now, not many, but there are occasions where parents will take legal advisors in with them. But I think that the key thing around that is it's around the effective participation test that is supposed to be limited to those parents who actually need support to effectively participate in the hearing itself. I'm certainly not aware of any suggestions being made that parents have in any way influenced other reports, other information that is coming to a hearing.
Okay, Liam?
Yeah, I think if we can maybe move away from the type or the basis in which the decisions are taken to actually the length of time that is taken to reach decisions, and in particular provide permanence for the child in question. We've had a range of written evidence. The issues come up in I think all of the the oral sessions that we've had and the visits that we've taken part in. I think Angus Council point to SRA research that acknowledges the impact of systems such as children's hearings in courts, which can contribute to causing delays in achieving permanent care arrangements. Malcolm Schaefer on the 15th of January referred to current permanence procedures being clunky. Now, there is some concern, I think, expressed by the Care Inspectorate that actually the impact of recent adoption legislation on timescales may make the situation worse. And they talk about the uncertainty as to the impact of recently implemented adoption legislation in speeding up decision-making processes in the children's hearing system and courts. Now, obviously, we don't want a system where the decisions are fast but aren't necessarily the correct ones. There are due processes that need to be followed. And at the same time, we've heard evidence in Glasgow with the New Orleans model and again in Perth and Kinross recently in terms of the model that they're developing of ways in which they are shortening those time frames. But it'd be helpful, I think, for the committee to know what steps through the bill are going to facilitate a speeding up of those decision-making processes without undermining the quality of the decisions that are being taken.
I mean, on the permanence agenda, I would say that it would be likely that the Minister or colleagues who looked after children would talk to you with some more authority about this. But having spoken to them in outline terms and also to the training officers, it's absolutely acknowledged that stable permanence is the way forward, and there is an acknowledgement of that within the system. Indeed, when those Adoption Act changes first came through, there was mandatory training for each and every panel member to make sure that they understood those changes. In relation to the issues that are perceived with the current adoption legislation or the relatively recent legislation, again, in discussion with other officials, what my understanding is that that's primarily taken forward the Looked After Children Strategic Implementation Group, the work streams there, but certainly they've indicated that they were open to making what they described as surgical changes to adoption legislation, certainly to having discussions on that, where that was going to be shown to be able to kind of expedite these processes and get to sustainable, sound decisions in the right sort of time frame. I think there is an acknowledgement, absolutely, about how quickly time passes and issues can develop in a child's life. So,
yeah. I mean, one of the issues that's helpful. One of the issues that's come up is the breakdowns in communication. I think again, Malcolm Schaefer referred to the need to improve communications between the SCRA and the Scottish Court Service, but again, I'm aware of instances where paperwork and reports from social workers to the Children's Hearing Panel are delivered either very late in the day and therefore make it difficult for panel members to assimilate the information being presented to them, or indeed doesn't come forward in a time frame that allows the hearing to actually take place, and the rescheduling of hearings then cause sort of further delay and presumably anxiety for the children concerned. Are there provisions within within the statutory instruments or whatever that will ensure that either doesn't happen or happens a great deal less, or indeed that there's enough advance notice given such that the system could be managed more effectively, more smoothly?
Yeah. There are kind of a couple of competing considerations there, if I'm honest. There are a range of reasons why social work and other reports come late in the day before children's hearings, and I think that by and large panel members would want to be certain that the integrity of the decision and their ability to look at those reports, to assess them, and then to have a discussion with the presenting professional would be really important. And the way that we've come at the drafting of the new procedural rules that Kit spoke about earlier was to try and to peg that expectation there to make sure that there was an appropriate lag between the delivery of the report and the ability of the next children's hearing to consider it. But what we didn't want to do was to make the requirements so strict as to preclude kind of late-breaking updates to the situation, if you like, if there had been some sort of breakdown or incident even the day before the hearing or even on that morning.
But that would, I think, be entirely understandable in the instance where the bulk of the report had been prepared, had been submitted, and was simply updated with, as you say, late developing information or insight. But actually, having set the date for the hearing, which has presumably been taken with the views of social work teams in mind in terms of the timeframes they would need to prepare the reports, presumably a fairly robust line can be taken that those dates should hold, that the information should be provided in time, and that if there is additional information that needs to be provided, there is still scope to do that, but in a sense it's embellishing or amending or whatever the main part of the information that is absolutely critical to the hearings doing their work.
Sure, it's absolutely the expectation that timely and relevant and helpful reports are available to the hearing, and trying to set that expectation clearly for all professionals. And panel members find themselves in a difficult situation where they have kind of late or incomplete information because the child and the family is along that morning. They want to have a meaningful discussion that's supported by up-to-date relevant information, but equally there may be very kind of vexed or critical issues in that child's life, so they have a bit of a dilemma there in terms of how they proceed and when they proceed. But certainly we do want to reinforce the expectation that full and timely reports are going to be available to children's hearings to give them half a chance to be able to do their job properly.
Claire Adamson.
Hey, thank you, Convener. Good morning. We took evidence from a number of groups during the course of the investigations, and I'd like to talk to you about the accessibility and the alienation felt particularly by the parents with learning disability and also the care leavers who were leaving the system. So if I could ask about the learning disabilities, first of all, the parents told us that very often the process of leading up to the hearing system and their involvement with it, that they had a very little understanding of the process, mainly because a lot of the information that was given to them and the whole procedural aspect of it wasn't presented in a format that they could access easily and by rights, in a lot of ways, get that information understood. So resultingly, they felt when they were in the hearing system, when they got to the hearing itself, that everybody was against them, and there was no one there really to support them as a family unit. And I just wonder if you have any ideas about how this changing legislation might address some of those issues.
Yeah, I think it is. It's a very real issue for those parents. There's no doubt about that, and we've had various discussions with the Scottish Consortium for Learning Disability about that and about how, they've said very much the kind of things that you just said about how parents feel and how difficult it is for them in that circumstance. I mean, we worked with them back in about, I think, 2010, 2011 to produce a DVD for parents with learning disability to see before going into the hearing situation, to try and help them understand what it is that they were, what they were going to be finding themselves faced with. I think that's a small step. It's by no means the solution to the issue. I think, as I said already, there is the situation now whereby parents who are unable to participate effectively in a children's hearing can have state-funded legal support in order to help them in that circumstance as well, which will help that a bit. In terms of what's in the Act specifically, there's nothing in the Act specifically that will help parents with learning disabilities, but I was very encouraged by what the National Convener was saying at the session on the 15th of January. She's clearly very well aware of this issue. I know she's spoken to the consortium and to others as well, and is very, very committed to doing what she can to make sure that moving forward, more is done to help parents in those situations.
when it comes to the care leavers that we spoke to, again, they had there was a real sense of alienation about the whole process. And I know you've mentioned that there is an opportunity already to speak to the children involved in private, but the care leavers were actually talking about how they, for all sorts of reasons, they didn't want to speak in front of the parents, and that could be fear, it could be they didn't want to embarrass their parents, and just the whole emotional experience of coming face to face with a parent, maybe after a period of separation in that situation, and as a result they just sort of clammed up, if you like. So how will you address and really ensure that any child who needs to be seen in private and needs that private space will be given that opportunity in the process?
Well, so I mean, certainly, at the hearings that I've been at recently, I mean, that's been common practice. That the child would always be given that opportunity to speak without the parent in the room, or without any adults in the room at all. I mean, I think that the provisions around advocacy is a big part of how we look to address this moving forward. And as I say, I mean, the advocacy support that we're envisaging is kind of before, during and after the hearing. It's not simply whilst the child is in the room. It is about very much helping them to prepare for and understand, I think that there are certainly cases at the moment where a child will arrive at a hearing not knowing whether or not mum or dad is going to be there, not even really knowing who to expect to see around the table. And I think that can be incredibly unsettling. And I think that, if nothing else, as part of that preparatory work that's being done with these children, they should go into that room knowing exactly who's going to be there. If they've not seen dad for 6 months and he's going to be there, then they know that in advance and feel, hopefully, better prepared and better able to contribute whilst they're there.
So, in terms of the advocacy that would be offered to the child, how do you ensure the quality of that advocacy? In terms of
it's a big question, because I think, as I said, I mean, I think advocacy is different things to different people. I think, for some people they would like, a paid, trained advocate to be there for them. Others would like people doing it more on a voluntary basis. Others would just like a friend or their auntie or their granddad or something to come with them to offer them that kind of moral support and help that they need. I think that certainly if we're looking at a system which has paid or voluntary, paid, volunteer and supported advocates working with children and young people, that would come with an element of quality assurance around it. One of the big pieces of work that we're still currently involved in is looking at what advocacy support for children and young people in the hearing system would look like. Which children should be able to access it, how do they access it, what it actually means, and absolutely how it is quality assured will be very much part of that.
Liam MacArthur?
Thanks very much. As Claire was suggesting there, the concerns expressed by some children about the way in which their views are taken on board, and some of the difficulties they experience in articulating their concerns, particularly in front of their own parents. I mean, you've suggested that it's very much the norm now in those circumstances for the hearings to kind of clear the room and allow the child to address the hearing themselves. Are there specific safeguards that need to be put in place to ensure that, as a result perhaps of the evidence that they then give to hearings, that decisions are taken that parents seek to challenge, that there is a kind of robust legal defence in those circumstances, that parents, as we've heard, may be more inclined to seek legal advice, if not legal representation in this process, that they don't have more of an opportunity to challenge the hearing's decisions, and whether or not they're successful, actually drag out the process still further. Is this something that's taken on board?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as it stands at the moment under the 95 Act, where that practice occurs, it's beholden then on the chair of the hearing to recount the substance of what the child has said whilst the various adults have been out of the room. And I think that we would expect that practice to continue. But what the Act does introduce it gives the power to the hearing that where they feel that revealing that information would place the child at risk of significant harm, they can then withhold that information from the parent. Certainly at that point there within the hearings room, they would withhold that information. Now clearly, you would expect that as a parent, if a decision is being taken that affects your contact or your dealings with your child, and you can't be told what it is that has caused that, there has to be room for appeal, and there has to be room for the parent to challenge that, because clearly, as a parent, you would not expect that to happen without you actually having the chance to know why it's happening and to have your say about it.
Is there a time frame then for that appeals process? I mean, as you say, when one needs to focus on the needs of the child, but one cannot sort of trammel the rights of parents in the process either. But in order to avoid a kind of an unduly lengthy appeals process, are there particular time constraints placed upon it? Can time constraints be placed upon it?
Yes, I mean, I think if you wish to appeal the decision of a children's hearing, you have 21 days to do that, and that's any decision, not just ones related to that particular incident.
Right, so it would fall under that provision.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Colin?
This committee's taken evidence in the past that, again, with parents with learning disabilities, that there's a disproportionately high number of such parents who have their children removed from them. And I've had some experience in watching this myself, where the parents, or even one of the parents, actually is classified as a vulnerable adult, and at the same time is going through a process of the hearing in connection with their children. Is there anything within what's being proposed that will provide some sort of framework to better deal with this? Because it doesn't seem that the system is all that good in handling this.
No, I think there's nothing specifically in the Act that will address that specific point. I mean, I think I've already spoken about the work that's been done with the consortium around learning disability and doing what we can to improve that situation now, and what the convener will do to address that situation moving forward. I mean, I think that there's a whole number of issues there, some of which I think can be addressed through the children's hearing, others I think are wider than that. I mean, certainly one of the things that I've been doing a while ago now in terms of my work with the consortium was to speak to the training officers and to speak to them about what training panel members currently receive around learning disability and around the issues that parents face who have, as you say, maybe vulnerable adults themselves. And I think that will certainly, we would certainly expect that to form part of the training arrangements moving forward, is that panel members are well aware of those issues and can take them into account in the decisions that they take.
So there will be specific training that is targeted at this aspect? That's intended.
Well, that's a decision for the National Convener, but I mean, certainly, the expectation is that all the elements that panel members need to have moving forward will be included in the training they receive.
Can I just ask one thing? I mean, for someone in that position to go before a hearing, it can be obviously extremely upsetting, making very anxious, forgetful, and all the rest of it. Is there any facility for them to provide evidence in another manner? For example, could they sit with their advocate and make a film, be video recorded and the evidence be provided in that way? Obviously there has to be an interaction about questions and whatever, but like a statement that they would make, an audio recording, something away from the heat of the tribunal room that would allow them to maybe express themselves in a more relaxed way.
Well, I certainly think that there are, although I couldn't swear to the sort of technological arrangements that you're alluding to, I certainly do know that there are opportunities for parents in those sort of circumstances to be able to give their views and have their views reflected in a range of reports prior to the hearing, so it's not all on them on the day in order to kind of articulate themselves.
Practically, how does that happen?
Well, I think it happens in a number of settings, whether it's over the phone, whether it's face-to-face meetings with the social worker, with the reporter, with other professionals who may be involved in the preparation of reports to the hearing. And in actual fact, in the normal assessment about whether or not a children's hearing is even needed in that case, whether or not there are concerns that actually might amount to a case for compulsory measures. So it might be earlier on in the process that those views are taken. I do know that SCRA, certainly Kit mentioned that there were a number of research reports about the accessibility of the system overall, and not just so much about the hearings experience in the hearings room, and they've looked to kind of overhaul their materials to make those more accessible, more plain English for a range of audiences. They've developed specific drafting for younger children and older young people and teenagers, and also looked to kind of clear up and to make more accessible and straightforward the drafting of their materials, and to be available to explain to people what they can expect of their whole experience in the system, and not just have that limited to a kind of an intensive experience on the single day in the hearings room. So they certainly are anxious about that as an issue, and I think that across the system the different partners would look to be fair to individuals who may have a range of needs, and to allow them to take the fullest part in the hearing. Certainly, I spoke also to the training officers in recent times, and they've said it's long been best practice for panel members to go back and check again that there is genuine understanding of what's at stake during the discussion, and that people are not just accepting because they feel that they need to accept because it's an important discussion on the day, and they genuinely see what's at play there for themselves and their children.
I would only add to that to say, I think when I spoke earlier about the SSIs that are coming forward, one of those that is coming forward does deal with vulnerable witnesses. I have to say that it's not the SSI that I'm most familiar with in terms of those that are coming forward, but what I was certainly happy to do is to go back and send you more information about what those regulations will cover and how we deal with vulnerable witnesses across the piece. I certainly know that those regulations will deal with children as vulnerable witnesses, but I would need to just double check that, and I can come back to you on that if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be very helpful, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Neil Webby?
I just wanted to go back to how any new legislation, or the new legislation, will support parents getting an advocate or a representative. Obviously, there's concerns that at the moment the only people that have legal representatives or the majority of people have legal representatives at children's hearing are the people that can afford it. And how do we ensure that we're having equal treatment of people in that process? Also, in terms of advocacy, a lot of good work is done by charities like Bernardo's in terms of children's advocacy services, but that's only available in certain areas. What are you doing to kind of make sure we're having that consistent support and advocacy across Scotland, throughout the country? Because obviously we're clearly hearing concerns about children's needs and children's concerns, but I think that's a crucial issue.
Yeah, I think there's a few things I would say to that. I think that, as it stands, I think in terms of access to state-funded legal support in the children's hearing, that came in 2002 for children and young people, and 2009 for relevant persons. I think that, as I said, with relevant persons, what the hearing is asked to do is to apply an effective participation test, i.e. that in order to participate effectively in the hearing, that parent should have access to state-funded legal support, and that's there at the moment. I think that the Act also allows...
Can I just, sorry, interrupt? We heard last week that, is it right to say that current legal aid provision does not cover representation by a solicitor at a hearing?
Well, yes, as it stands, there is no legal aid available for children's hearings at all. But what there is at the moment is there's an interim scheme that's been running for 10 years or so now, which is being addressed through the Act. And what that provides is that there is a panel of legal representatives in each local authority area, which is maintained by the authority. And what it means is that if a person needs a legal representative, they will be able to get one of those legal reps from that list to represent them and work with them in the children's hearing. The Act is changing that, and will for the first time make it available through legal aid, through the Legal Aid Board, for both children and relevant persons in hearings as well. You then talked about coverage of advocacy. I think absolutely we would accept that the current coverage is patchy. I think that in some areas there is, as you say, voluntary organisations and others who provide a really good service. In other areas it's not quite so strong. And this is one of the issues that so we have this working group, this advocacy working group. It's being worked on with us by SCRA and all of our kind of key partners in the area, children's rights officers, the voluntary advocacy providers and that kind of thing, and they're looking at these kind of issues because there's no point saying to children across the country you can have access to advocacy support if that advocacy support doesn't exist. So one of the issues that is being addressed and being looked at, part of that is, okay, well, how do we actually provide the support that needs to be made available?
Just to follow on the point about legal representation at hearings, what training is given to panel members when dealing with advocates? I've heard of a situation where an advocate was asked to leave a panel meeting because the panel chair thought it was unsuitable at that time for the advocate to be there. But they were there obviously to represent the children's views at that meeting. So what sort of kind of training and sort of guidance has been looked at in terms of how panel members deal with? I notice you've got the SLAB code of conduct, but maybe you could tell us a wee bit more about that.
Well, in relation to training and what happens currently, when those interim changes and others were introduced, again, there would have been mandatory training for all panel members. The panel members, and particularly the chairing member of the hearing, has the responsibility to kind of keep the tone and the focus of the discussion appropriate and very much centred on the child. So where I think that there was some conversation actually at the last evidence session, the 15th of January, and the kind of the concern was that how can lay volunteers hope to deal with qualified and skilled solicitors? Certainly they have been prepared to meet that challenge. In the odd hearing that I've observed, I've seen that in action. And by and large, what we've seen is legal representatives being an addition to the system, an augmentation to the system. And by and large, they've been very well prepared to absorb the ethos as a kind of discursive forum rather than an adversarial forum. But where there's inappropriate behaviour or there are concerns that the hearing is moving away from the focus on the child, then the chairing member can take steps to kind of manage the people in the room and then short adjournment, clear the air, bring people back in and then make sure that you are having a proper discussion with all the representatives there, making sure rights are protected.
Okay. Marco Biaggi?
Yes, one of the things that has been raised with the committee and the visits that have been held has been the potential overlap between two quite complex systems when you also have the interaction with the child protection committees. Is there, and obviously the same people dealing with both in terms of users. Has there been consideration given to streamlining that process or making any other improvements?
Well, in relation to child protection guidelines, I do know that panel members are trained and there will be updated training resource manuals available to all panel members before the changing arrangements in June to make sure that the revised child protection guidelines and the national expectations and best practice are with them and they take that into the hearing room with them on the day. In terms of the children's hearing systems, alignment and interaction with other approaches to child protection, we'd think about getting it right for every child and those sorts of approaches. Again, that's been made available to panel members and there's been long practice to get professionals from the Pathfinders or from particular disciplines along to share with panel members what have been their own developments in practice. I do know that there are healthy interactions between those sorts of professionals and children's supporters and others. I think what should happen is that there's a combination of professionals clustering around a child and working with a family and looking to address that child's needs, hopefully in accordance with the family's wishes, but certainly in accordance with their interests and with the child's best interests at heart. Where, for whatever reason, the child or the family's unwilling or unable to engage and there might be a need for compulsion, or where issues have developed to a point where compulsory care and protection might be needed, that's when the children's hearing system comes in. But they should already have the benefit of that kind of the child plan and the evidence of a clear history of the efforts that have been made to improve matters for that child before we're getting to the point where the tribunal's looking at compulsion.
Okay, anybody else before we? No. Can I say thank you very much for your evidence, and could I suspend the session for a couple of minutes till we change over? Okay, thank you. Okay, the next part of our agenda is our inquiry into decision making on whether to take children into care. And as part of the inquiry, the committee undertook a series of informal fact-finding visits, and it is important that we get the main points from these visits on the record. The clerks have prepared notes of our final 3 visits, which are published with this week's papers. Really wish to discuss these notes today, and then they will be put on the website along with the other evidence that has been received. They've all been agreed with the organisations who hosted us, and people will have a list of the meetings that we took part in. The 13th of November was with the chairs of the Child Protection Committees. 20th of November, a meeting with members of People First Scotland Parents Group. The 17th of December, meeting with care leavers at Who Cares Scotland. And then we went on to the NSPCC, and finally Perth and Kinross Council were the range of meetings that we've had so far. So really just, one other thing. Members, I don't know if all members received a letter from Who Cares Scotland. I certainly got one this morning, thanking us for our visit there, and looking forward to their opportunity to come forward and give evidence themselves, the young people, and the committee clerks have got some suggestions as to how we might move that forward, or really just to enhance our discussion. And we invite Neil just to mention that at this point.
It's just really to add that there'll be the committee will have opportunity to have a wider discussion on next steps and options for the rest of the inquiry in a couple of weeks' time. So this can be incorporated into any paper that goes to that.
Yeah, so if people have any thoughts at that point, we can bring that back as to how we would proceed. Colin.
Just one thing on the visit to Glasgow and the New Orleans intervention model. Maybe I'm missing something here, but I think they said it was a 27-month trial. I'm not sure. I can't find the reference to that in here. Maybe I've skipped over it, but they said it was a 27-month trial, and they also said the number of children that were involved, and it was quite a low number. And I don't see that. Maybe I've missed it, but I don't see it.
Okay.
It's not in the note, but we can attempt to incorporate that.
I think it's important to give some context around the evaluation of this pilot.
Okay. Anybody else like to raise any points on that? Just one on page 2 for me. Pre-care section on pre-care with the visit of to Who Cares Scotland. 1, 2. Point 3, 1, 2, 3, 4th bullet point, in reference to the siblings of children who were removed. I think one of the points that they were keen to get across was the fact that the young people who'd been removed from the family home had their life had improved, whereas their siblings who were left in the family home, their view was that their lives had got worse. If you like, their life experiences had been worse. So I think it's maybe important that we put that in. I'm trying to think who else was there. Neil, yeah, I think that would be fair to say. Yeah. Any other comments? I'm sure if there's any other, we can feed them to the clerks in due course. Okay. And on to the item 3. Next item is consideration of a negative statutory instrument. No motion to annul has been lodged, and the Subordinate Legislation Committee determined that it did not need to draw the attention of Parliament to it. Does any members have any comments? Do any members have any comments? No. Does the committee agree to make no recommendation to Parliament on SSI 2012-354? Thank you. I can now bring the meeting to a close.